On an ordinary day, a millionaire proposes an unusual challenge to his employee's son: to open a safe in just 60 seconds. The boy, calm and determined, uses a cardboard tube to listen to the sounds of the mechanism. While everyone watches in silence, he turns the dial and surprises even the boss. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's continue. The morning dawned with that humid heat characteristic of Chicago, the kind that clings to your skin and leaves the air heavy even before the sun has fully risen. Marianne Taylor adjusted her navy blue uniform for the 5th time that morning, checking that every button was in its place, that the collar was neatly pressed, and that her black shoes shone sufficiently. 18 years working at the Blackwood Mansion in Lincoln Park, and she still felt that pit in her stomach every time she stepped into the entrance hall. It wasn't exactly fear, but something akin to forced respect, that feeling of always being evaluated, always being measured by eyes that never missed an opportunity to find a flaw. The electronic gate opened with a low hum, and she entered, as always, through the back. The house was immense, with 3 stories, a heated pool, a tennis court, and a garden that seemed to have no end. Marianne knew every corner of that place, every piece of imported furniture, every expensive painting hanging on the marble walls. She also knew the secrets those walls hid, the whispered arguments, the cold glances exchanged between husband and wife, the loneliness disguised as luxury. Her son Leo was 12 years old and was her reason for living. The boy was thin, with curious eyes, and an intelligence that sometimes even frightened her. He always carried a worn-out blue backpack, full of notebooks, colored pens, and school project materials. That morning, he had insisted on accompanying her because he had a science presentation in the afternoon and wanted to review his notes before going to school. Marianne didn't usually take him to work, but the boy had a way of asking that could disarm any mother, and she had ended up giving in. Mr. Edward Blackwood, as everyone in the house called him, was a real estate tycoon, owner of one of the biggest construction firms in the city. At 52, he had everything money could buy: imported cars, international trips, designer clothes, and a wife 20 years his junior. But there was something in his eyes that Marianne had always noticed, and that deeply bothered her. It was a cold, calculating arrogance, the kind of superiority that needs no words, to make itself felt. He treated the staff with that formal politeness that is even worse than rudeness, because it's always accompanied by a smile that doesn't reach the eyes. That morning, something was different. Marianne noticed it as soon as she entered the kitchen and found Vera, the house's longest-serving cook, with a worried expression on her face. The woman was chopping onions with excessive force, the kind of motion she made when she was nervous. "Good morning, Vera. Did something happen?" Marianne asked, placing her bag in the locker. The cook looked around before answering, as if afraid of being overheard. "He woke up strange today, quieter than usual. You know how he gets when he's plotting something." Marianne knew that pattern well. Edward Blackwood wasn't the type to shout or make a scene. He was worse. He was the type who planned, who waited for the right moment, who struck when least expected. And in recent days she had felt the weight of his gaze on her, as if she were being studied, evaluated for something she couldn't comprehend. Leo was sitting in the utility room, a long cardboard tube next to his backpack. It was a project for his physics class, something about sound waves and amplification. The boy had explained it excitedly the night before, but Marianne, exhausted after a full day's work, had just nodded, pretending to understand. Now, seeing her son so focused on his notebooks, she felt a pang of guilt for not being able to give him more attention, more time, more of everything he deserved. "Marianne, I need to speak with you in my study." Edward's voice came through the intercom, dry and direct. Her heart pounded. In all those years, she had been called to his study only 3 times. Once to receive a raise, another to be reprimanded for breaking an expensive piece of Chinese porcelain, and the third to hear praise after organizing a charity event that impressed her employer's wife's friends. None of those occasions had been pleasant, even when the reason was supposedly good. She climbed the main staircase with slow steps, feeling the weight of each one. The study was on the 2nd floor, A huge room with mahogany shelves filled with books no one read, a desk larger than her own kitchen, and an enormous imposing safe installed against the back wall. That safe had always caught her attention. It was made of brushed steel, with a digital lock and a mechanical one, the kind that looks like it's straight out of a heist movie. "Come in, Marianne, and bring your son too." His voice came from behind the desk, where he sat with an erect posture, his hands clasped on the glass surface. She felt her blood run cold. Why did he want Leo there? The boy had nothing to do with her work, had never done anything that could bother her employer. "Sir, he's studying. I'd prefer if—" she began, but he cut her off with a wave of his hand. "I'm not asking, Marianne. I'm telling you, bring the boy." She went back downstairs, her heart beating erratically. Leo looked up from his notebook when he saw her, immediately noticing the tension on his mother's face. "Honey, Mr. Edward wants to talk to us. Let's go up for a minute, okay?" The boy didn't ask any questions. He grabbed his backpack and the cardboard tube and followed his mother. Marianne felt like grabbing him by the hand and running out of that house, but she knew it was impossible. She needed that job, that salary, that life which, however difficult, was the only one she had. When they entered the study, Edward was standing next to the safe. He looked at Leo with an expression Marianne couldn't decipher. It wasn't hostility exactly, but there was something there that made her even more uneasy. "So this is the famous Leo. Your mother talks a lot about you, says you're a smart boy." Leo just nodded, clutching his backpack to his chest. Marianne took a step forward, trying to place herself between her son and her employer, but Edward gestured for her to stay where she was. "I'm proposing a challenge, a game if you prefer to call it that." His voice was calm, almost friendly, but there was a note of something dangerous behind the words. He pointed to the safe. "If the boy can open this safe in 60 seconds, I will deposit $100,000 into your account, Marianne. Enough money to change your life, to give your son a better education, to get out of that rented house in Englewood and maybe buy a place of your own." The silence that followed was so thick that Marianne found it hard to breathe. $100,000. It was more money than she would earn in 5 years of work. It was the chance to give Leo everything she had ever dreamed of. But at the same time, there was something deeply wrong with this proposal. Why would Edward do this? What did he gain from it? "Sir, with all due respect, this doesn't make any sense. My son is 12 years old. He doesn't know how to open safes. This is—" she hesitated, searching for the right words. "This is impossible." Edward smiled, and it was the kind of smile that warms nothing. "Impossible is an interesting word, Marianne. Your son goes to a public school, right? But he still gets excellent grades. You've told me that a few times, so maybe he's more capable than you imagine." He turned to Leo. "And you, kid? Do you accept the challenge?" Marianne was about to refuse for him, but Leo took a step forward. There was something in his eyes, a mixture of curiosity and determination that she knew well. It was the same look he had when he spent hours trying to solve a math problem or when he took apart old appliances to understand how they worked. "Mom, I can try," he said, his voice low. "No, Leo, this is crazy." She looked at Edward with a firmness she rarely showed in his presence. "You're toying with us. This is humiliating." "It would be humiliating if I were doubting his ability, but I'm not. I'm offering an opportunity, and if he fails, nothing changes. You continue to work here, receive your salary as usual. No punishments, no consequences, just one attempt, 60 seconds. There was something in the way he spoke that made Marianne realize this. It wasn't just about the money. It was about power, about proving something, but proving what? And to whom? She looked at her son, saw the backpack clutched to his chest, the cardboard tube still in his left hand, and felt a mixture of pride and fear that only a mother can feel. Leo wasn't like other children. He had always been different, more observant, quieter, more attentive to details that others ignored. "All right," she said, her voice coming out weaker than she would have liked. "But if at any moment he wants to stop, it's over immediately." Edward nodded and picked up a digital stopwatch from the desk. "Ready? As soon as I press this, the time starts." Leo approached the safe. It was huge, almost reaching his height. The mechanical lock had a numbered dial, the kind that needs to be turned left and right in a precise sequence. He pressed his ear against the metal, trying to hear something, but the sound of his own breathing and heartbeat made it impossible to pick up anything. Marianne watched, paralyzed, her hands clasped in a silent prayer. She couldn't understand why she had agreed to this. What mother puts her child in such a situation? But at the same time, she knew that Leo wanted this, that in some strange way this was the kind of challenge that made him shine. The boy stepped away from the safe and looked at the cardboard tube in his hand. Then, with a calmness that impressed even Edward, he placed one end of the tube against the safe's metal and the other to his ear, creating a sort of improvised stethoscope. Edward raised an eyebrow. Clever. And he started the stopwatch. The sound of the electronic beep seemed to echo throughout the room. Leo began to turn the dial slowly, listening through the tube. His eyes were closed, his forehead furrowed in absolute concentration. Marianne could barely breathe. Each second felt like an eternity. 15 seconds. Leo stopped, turned the dial in the opposite direction. He was looking for something, some specific sound that only he could hear through that cardboard tube. Edward watched with his arms crossed, his expression neutral. But there was a glint in his eyes that Marianne couldn't interpret. 30 seconds. A soft click, almost imperceptible. But Leo heard it. His eyes opened for an instant, a flash of hope crossing his face, and he continued turning, now with more confidence. Marianne felt tears burn in her eyes. It didn't matter if he succeeded or not. What mattered was that her son was there, facing something impossible, with a courage she would never have. That thin boy with a worn-out backpack and a cardboard tube was challenging a safe that cost more than the house they lived in. 45 seconds. Leo stopped again. He stood motionless for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. Then, with a movement so delicate it almost went unnoticed, he turned the dial just a millimeter. A second click. Louder. More defined. Edward leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the safe. 50 seconds. The boy was trembling now. Marianne could see his hands shaking, sweat starting to bead on his forehead. She wanted to scream for him to stop, that it didn't matter, that they would be fine either way. But she knew she couldn't. This was his moment, and she had to trust him. 55 seconds. Leo turned the dial one last time. There was absolute silence. Neither Edward nor Marianne dared to breathe. Then a final click, stronger than the others. Definitive. The boy grasped the safe's handle with both hands, took a deep breath and pulled. The door swung open. The stopwatch read 58 seconds. Marianne felt her legs give way. Edward stood still for a moment that seemed eternal, looking at the open safe, then at the boy, then at the cardboard tube still in his hand. Then, for the first time since Marianne had known him, she saw something that could be mistaken for genuine respect in his eyes. The businessman took a step forward, knelt in front of Leo, and for the first time spoke to him not as an adult speaks to a child, but as an equal speaks to another. "How did you do that?" Leo was shaking, but his voice came out firm. "At school we learned about sound waves, how they travel better through solid objects. So I thought if I used the tube to amplify the sound, I might be able to hear the mechanisms inside the safe. Every time a tumbler aligned, it made a different click. I just had to find the right sequence." Edward was silent for a long moment. Then he stood up, went to his desk, took out a checkbook and began to write. Marianne watched everything as if in a dream. This couldn't be happening, it couldn't be real. When he handed her the check, her hands trembled so much she almost dropped it. $100,000. The number was there, written in that elegant, firm handwriting. It was real, it had happened. "You have an exceptional son, Marianne, and I underestimated both of you." He looked at Leo again. "Never underestimate someone who knows how to listen, kid. Not just to objects, but to people. The world is full of noise, but the real secrets are in the silence between the sounds." Marianne pulled Leo into a tight hug, feeling the tears finally roll freely. The boy returned the hug, but his eyes were still fixed on the open safe, as if he couldn't believe what he had just done. But as mother and son shared that moment, neither of them noticed the figure standing in the half-open doorway of the study. Helen Blackwood, Edward's wife, watched everything with a cold expression. She was 32, had a degree in architecture from an expensive private university, and 8 years ago had married a man who could give her everything except genuine attention. Helen was not happy with what she had just witnessed, not because of the amount of money, which to her was insignificant, but because of the way her husband looked at that maid and her son, with admiration, with respect, with something she hadn't seen in his eyes when he looked at her in years. She walked away silently, her heels making a discreet sound on the marble hallway, and descended the stairs with her mind working quickly. There was something dangerous in that scene, something that threatened the carefully constructed order of that house, and Helen was not the type to allow threats. Back in the study, Edward watched Marianne put the check in her purse with trembling hands. "You'll want to take a few days off, I imagine, to process all this." She shook her head. "I need to work, sir." But she hesitated, searching for the right words. "Why did you do this? Did you really want to see if Leo could do it? Or was there another reason?" Edward sat back down behind his desk, and for the first time, Marianne saw something resembling weariness on his face. "I had a son. He would be about Leo's age now." His voice grew softer. "But he's not here anymore, and when I saw your boy with that cardboard tube, with that curiosity in his eyes, I remembered how my son used to be, always taking things apart, always asking questions. I wanted to see if children like that still exist in the world, children who solve problems instead of just complaining about them." Marianne didn't know what to say. She had never heard Edward mention a son. She had never seen pictures of a child in that house. It was as if he had opened a door to a secret room in his life, and she didn't know whether to enter or retreat. "I'm very sorry for your loss, sir." He nodded, already returning to that mask of professional coldness. "You may go, and take the boy to school. He has a presentation today, doesn't he?" Mother and son left the study in silence. Only when they were halfway down the stairs did Leo finally speak, his voice still trembling with adrenaline. "Mom, did that really happen? Did we win $100,000? Marianne stopped in the middle of the staircase and hugged her son again, this time laughing and crying at the same time. "It did, my love. You were amazing, absolutely amazing." But as they descended the rest of the stairs, she couldn't help but think of Edward's expression when he mentioned his son. There was pain there, real pain, and for the first time in 18 years, she wondered who this man really was behind the arrogance and the coldness. And meanwhile, upstairs, Helen Blackwood closed her bedroom door with enough force to make the pictures on the walls tremble. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. "We need to talk, now, about that maid." And on the other end of the line, a female voice replied with a tone that made it clear that trouble was just beginning. "I'm listening. What did she do this time?" "It's not what she did. It's what my husband is doing, and it's not going to continue." The days following the safe incident were strange in a way Marianne couldn't put into words. It was as if the temperature in the Blackwood house had changed, as if the air were heavier, more charged, with something invisible but palpable. She continued to work as usual, arriving at 7 in the morning and leaving at 5 in the afternoon, but now she felt different eyes on her. Not just Helen's, who had always treated her with that icy politeness characteristic of someone who has never had to clean their own house, but also the other staff members. Carla, the housekeeper who worked on the second-floor bedrooms, had been particularly cold in recent days. They had always had a cordial relationship, exchanging a few words during breakfast, sharing discreet complaints about their employer's demands. But since the safe incident, Carla barely looked at Marianne, and when she did, there was something in her eyes that seemed dangerously close to envy. The following Wednesday, Marianne was in the laundry room folding towels when Carla came in to get clean sheets. The silence between them was so thick it seemed to occupy physical space in the small room. "I heard you won a fortune," Carla said finally, without looking directly at Marianne. "Your son must be very smart." There was poison in those words disguised as a casual comment. Marianne knew that tone. It was the same one she heard as a child when she got a better grade than the others in school, and some classmates said she must have cheated. It was the voice of insecurity turned into an attack. It was just a challenge, Carla. A silly thing Mr. Edward came up with. Marianne tried to sound nonchalant, but her voice came out more defensive than she intended. A silly thing worth $100,000. We've been working here for years and have never seen an extra cent beyond our salary. But you come with your son, put on a little show, and there you go. Must be nice to have all that luck. Marianne felt her blood boil. Luck. Was it luck to see her son trembling with nervousness, with the weight of an impossible decision on the shoulders of a 12-year-old boy? Was it luck to feel her heart nearly stop with every second that passed on that stopwatch? But she swallowed the angry words that wanted to come out and simply finished folding the towels in silence. When Carla left, Marianne leaned against the wall and took a deep breath, trying to control the tremor in her hands. This was just the beginning. She knew it. Money changes everything, especially when it appears where it's not expected. And people have an impressive capacity to turn admiration into resentment in the blink of an eye. That same afternoon, while Marianne was cleaning the dining room, Helen came down the stairs wearing a dress that probably cost more than the maid's annual salary. She stopped at the door, watching Marianne work for a moment before speaking. "Marianne, I need to talk to you about some changes." The tone was overly polite, and that set off all the alarms in Marianne's head. "Yes, ma'am?" "I'm reorganizing the house's routine. Starting next week, you will only work from Monday to Thursday. I'm bringing someone else in to cover Fridays and weekends." Marianne felt the floor open up beneath her. This meant losing a day of work per week, losing part of her salary, losing the stability she had built over nearly 2 decades. "But, Mrs. Blackwood, I've always worked the full week. If I've done something wrong, please tell me what it was so I can correct it." Helen gave that small, cold smile that never reached her eyes. "It's not about you having done anything wrong. It's just an administrative change. You'll continue to be paid at the same rate, don't worry, you'll just have fewer workdays." And before Marianne could respond, Helen went back up the stairs, her heels making that precise, irritating sound on the marble. Marianne stood in the middle of the dining room, the cleaning cloth still in her hand, trying to process what had just happened. Helen was lying. It was obvious. This wasn't about administrative reorganization. It was about control. It was about putting Marianne in her place after she had dared to receive too much attention from her husband. When she got home that night, Leo was at the small kitchen table doing his homework. Their house was simple, 3 rooms in a small complex in Englewood, but it was clean and organized. Marianne was proud of every corner of that place, every piece of furniture bought with sacrifice, every curtain she had sewn herself. "Mum, are you okay?" Leo looked up from his notebook, immediately noticing the tension on her face. "I'm fine, honey. Just tired." But Leo was no fool. He had an ability to read people that went far beyond his years. "It's because of the money, isn't it? The people at Mr. Edward's house are being different with you." Marianne sat down next to her son and sighed. "How do you know that?" "I know how things work, Mum. When someone who isn't supposed to have something good gets it, other people get upset, like we stole their luck." Those words came from the mouth of a 12-year-old, but they carried a sad wisdom, the kind of knowledge no child should have. Marianne felt like hugging him and apologizing for him having to grow up so fast, for having to understand so early how the world works. "But we're not going to let it affect us, okay? We're going to use this money wisely. We'll save most of it, invest in your future. You're going to have the education you deserve." Leo nodded, but his eyes were worried. "Mom, should we have accepted that challenge? Sometimes I wonder if it would have been better to leave things as they were." Marianne held her son's face in her hands. "You did something incredible, Leo. Something most adults couldn't do. Don't ever regret it. The problem isn't what you did. The problem is how people react when they see something they think shouldn't happen." That night, after Leo was asleep, Marianne sat on the small porch of their house, looking up at the dark Chicago sky, where you could barely see stars because of the light pollution. She held the check in her hands, still not fully believing it was real. $100,000. It was both freedom and a prison. Freedom because she finally had a chance to change things, to give her son the opportunities she never had. Prison because now she was marked, watched, envied, and then her cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Hello? Marianne, it's Edward. I hope I'm not calling too late." His voice sounded different over the phone, less formal, more tired. Marianne felt her heart speed up. "No, sir. It's fine. Did something happen?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, and she could hear the sound of ice clinking in a glass, probably whiskey. "I wanted to apologize." "Apologize? For what?" "For putting you and your son in that situation. It was selfish of me. He hesitated, searching for the words. "I was trying to fill a void, and I ended up using you both for it. It wasn't fair." Marianne didn't know what to say. This was not the voice of the arrogant man she had known for so many years. It was the voice of someone lonely, possibly drunk, definitely unhappy. "Mr. Edward, I don't understand. You gave us a chance to change our lives. Why are you apologizing?" "Because things are going to get difficult for you now. My wife didn't like what happened. And when Helen doesn't like something, she finds ways to make people's lives complicated." Marianne felt a shiver run down her spine. "I've already noticed. She reduced my workdays." "She did what?" His voice grew harsher. "Without consulting me." "She said it was an administrative reorganization." Edward let out a bitter laugh. "Of course she did. Look, Marianne, I'm going to reverse that tomorrow. You'll go back to working the full week as normal. But I need you to understand something. Helen will find other ways to get to you. She's subtle, but she's relentless." "Why are you telling me this?" There was another pause, longer this time. "Because I was married before, I had a family before, and I lost everything because I was too busy building an empire to realize I was destroying what really mattered. When I saw your son there, with that cardboard tube, trying to solve an impossible problem, I remembered how my son used to be, and I don't want you to lose yours the way I lost mine." "You said your son isn't here anymore. What happened to him?" Another silence, heavier. "My ex-wife took him away after the divorce. She went to the UK. He was 7. Today he's 15 and barely knows me. He talks to me once a year on Christmas because his mother makes him. But I'm not really his father. I'm just the man who sends money every month." Marianne felt a deep pain in those words. "I'm so sorry, sir." "Me too. That's why I'm calling you. That's why I'm warning you. Don't let Helen turn your victory into a defeat, and don't let that money change who you are. Leo is special precisely because he hasn't been corrupted by all this yet. Keep him that way." And before Marianne could respond, he hung up. She sat on the porch for another hour, the phone still in her hand, processing that surreal conversation. Edward Blackwood had just revealed a side of himself she never imagined existed. And now she had to decide what to do with that information, with that warning, with that strange alliance that seemed to be forming. The next morning, when Marianne arrived at work, she found Vera in the kitchen with a worried expression. "The missus sent for you, in her office, not Mr. Edwards, her office on the 3rd floor." Marianne had never been called to Helen's personal office. Few employees had. It was a private sanctuary where she spent hours doing who knows what. Decorating, perhaps, online shopping, calling friends to complain about how tedious married life was. She went up the stairs with a heavy heart. The 3rd floor was different from the rest of the house. More modern, colder, all decorated in shades of grey and white. Helen's office was at the end of the hall, a room with large windows overlooking the garden and expensive Scandinavian design furniture. Helen was sitting behind a glass desk, wearing reading glasses and flipping through an architecture magazine. She looked at Marianne over the glasses and gestured for her to enter. "Sit down." Marianne obeyed, sitting in a chair that was uncomfortably modern. "I spoke with my husband last night. Or rather, he spoke with me. About you." Helen's voice was controlled, but there was venom at the edges. "Apparently, he reversed my decision about your work schedule. You're back to working the full week." "Yes, ma'am, thank you." "Don't thank me. It wasn't my choice." Helen took off her glasses and looked directly at Marianne. "I'm going to be direct with you because I don't have patience for games. My husband is having a pathetic midlife crisis. He sees in your son some kind of redemption for the son he lost, and he's using you and the boy as cheap therapy." Marianne felt anger boil up, but she kept her voice calm. "With all due respect, Mrs. Blackwood, I don't know what's going on between you and your husband. I just work here, I do my job, and I go home. You think that's all it is?" Helen leaned forward, her eyes shining with something dangerous. "You think you can accept $100,000 from my husband and pretend nothing has changed?" "Everything has changed, Marianne. You stopped being invisible. And invisible people are useful. Visible people are problems. What do you want from me? I want you to understand your place, that you don't confuse generosity with importance. My husband may have given you money, but that doesn't make you part of this family. It doesn't give you rights. You are still what you have always been, a maid." Every word was a slap in the face. Marianne felt tears burn in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wouldn't give Helen that satisfaction. "I understand, ma'am. May I go now?" Helen put her glasses back on and resumed reading the magazine, as if Marianne had already ceased to exist. "You may." When Marianne left that office, she had to lean against the hallway wall to keep from collapsing. Her legs were shaking, her heart was pounding, and for the first time since it all began, she seriously wondered if that money was worth all this suffering. She descended the stairs slowly, feeling the weight of each step. When she reached the first floor, she almost collided with Edward, who was rushing up. "Marianne, are you all right?" He held her arm, concerned. "I am, sir, just a little dizzy." "It was her, wasn't it? What did Helen say to you?" Marianne looked around, making sure they were alone. "She made it clear that I'm not welcome here, that the money didn't change anything, that I'm still just the maid." Edward clenched his jaw. "She has no right to speak to you like that." "With all due respect, sir, she has every right. This is her house, and I really am just the maid." "No." His voice came out firm. "You are much more than that. You are a mother who raised an exceptional son, on her own, working endless hours without complaining, without asking for anything more than a fair wage. And your son is a prodigy. You both deserve respect." Marianne felt the tears finally stream down her face. "Thank you, sir. But maybe it would be better if I looked for another job. I don't want to cause problems in your marriage." Edward looked at her for a long moment, and there was so much sadness in his eyes that Marianne felt the urge to hug him, to tell him everything would be okay, even knowing it was a lie. "My marriage has been destroyed for years, Marianne. You're not causing anything. You're just illuminating cracks that have always been there." He moved away, climbing the rest of the stairs, and Marianne heard an argument begin on the second floor, raised voices echoing through the marble corridors. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Marianne performed her tasks mechanically, avoiding eye contact with the other employees, feeling the weight of their silent judgments. When it was finally time to leave, she practically ran out of that house, only breathing when the gate closed behind her. On the crowded bus ride home, she took out her phone and opened the picture she had taken of the check before depositing it. $100,000, numbers on a screen. But what price was she paying for them, and what would the final price be? When she got home, Leo was sitting on the porch with a notebook on his lap, but he wasn't writing. He was just looking at the darkening sky. "Honey, what are you doing out here?" He looked at her with those eyes that were too old for his age. "I was thinking about what Mr. Edward said, about knowing how to listen. I think sometimes we hear things we'd rather not hear." "What do you mean?" "At school today, some boys were talking about us, saying we scammed our rich boss, that you're trying to take advantage of him, things like that." Marianne felt her blood run cold. "How did they find out?" "One of the boys is Carla's son, the housekeeper. She must have told him, and he spread it to everyone." "And what did you do?" Leo shrugged, but there was pain in his eyes. "Nothing. What could I do? If I fought, it would prove. If I fought, they were right. If I ignored them, it would seem like I was ashamed. So I just stayed quiet and took it." Marianne sat down next to her son and pulled him into a tight hug. "You did the right thing, my love. People who talk without knowing are like the wind. They make noise, but they can't hurt you if you don't let them." "But I don't know if I can not let them, Mom, because their words hurt. They really hurt." And then, there on the small porch of that simple house in Englewood, mother and son cried. together, letting all the tension and pain of the last few days finally escape. And when they were done, when there were no more tears, Marianne looked at Leo and said with a conviction she didn't know she possessed, "We're going to get through this, together, because we always get through everything and nobody is going to take that away from us." Leo nodded, wiping his eyes. "Promise we won't change, that we won't become like them?" "I promise, my love. We may have money now, but we will never lose who we are." But as she made that promise, Marianne couldn't help but think of Helen, of Carla, of all the judgmental looks that now followed her, and she wondered, in the bottom of her heart, if she could really keep that promise. Because the world has a cruel way of testing people, of pushing them to their limits, of forcing them to choose between dignity and survival. And the choice, she was beginning to realize, is not always as clear as it seems. 3 weeks had passed since the safe incident, and the Blackwood mansion had become a minefield of unspoken tensions. Marianne continued to work, with the same dedication as always, but now her every move seemed to be watched, analyzed, judged. Helen would pass her in the hallways without a word, but the silence was more eloquent than any insult. And Edward, for his part, seemed to be avoiding his wife with an almost artistic dedication, spending more and more time in his study or on business trips. It was on a rainy Thursday, with that fine, persistent rain typical of Chicago in May, that everything truly began to fall apart. Marianne was in the laundry room folding clothes when she heard raised voices, coming from the second floor. It wasn't unusual for Edward and Helen to argue, but this was different. There was an intensity, an urgency in their voices that made Marianne stop what she was doing and listen. "You're obsessed with that woman and her son," Helen's voice echoed down the hall. "You barely look at me, barely speak to me, but for her, you have time for conversations, for late-night calls, for grand gestures of $100,000. "This has nothing to do with Marianne." Edward's voice sounded tired. "It has to do with you and me, with the fact that this marriage has been dead for years and we both know it." There was a heavy silence. Then the sound of something being thrown against the wall, probably a vase or a picture frame. "Dead? You think it's dead? Then let me show you what's really dead, Edward. A dead marriage is one that everyone knows is over, and I'm not going to give you that pleasure." Marianne felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something in Helen's voice that sounded dangerous, almost threatening. She was about to go back to the laundry room when she heard her own name. "If you think I'm going to stand here and watch you play benefactor to that maid, you're sorely mistaken. I have friends, Edward, friends who can make her life very difficult. A call to immigration about her brother's situation, working without papers. A call to the boys' school about irregularities in his enrollment. You know how these things work." Marianne's heart almost stopped. How did Helen know about Robert, her younger brother who had come from down south 2 years ago and worked construction without a contract? How did she know about Leo's enrollment, that he had transferred schools in the middle of last year using a friend's address to get into a better institution? Edward must have thought the same thing, because his voice turned icy when he replied, "You're threatening me through an innocent employee? Have we sunk to this level? I'm protecting my marriage, and if you can't see the difference, then maybe you're even more pathetic than I thought." Marianne backed away silently, her heart beating so hard she was sure everyone in the house could hear it. She had to get out of there, she had to think, she had to protect Leo and Robert from a storm she didn't even know was brewing. But before she could reach the back exit, Vera appeared in the kitchen with a grave expression. "Marianne, there's someone waiting for you outside. A man in a suit. Said he's from Leo's school." Marianne's blood ran cold. She went to the back door and found a man in his 40s, with glasses and a leather briefcase, standing under a black umbrella. "Mrs. Taylor, my name is Robert Fields. I'm from Child Protective Services. We received an anonymous tip regarding irregularities in your son Leo's enrollment. We need to talk." Marianne felt the world spin. Already. Helen had acted so fast she hadn't even had time to prepare. "Sir, I can explain. The school he was at before was very far, and a friend offered her address so he could study closer. It wasn't anything illegal, it was just a mother trying to give her son a better education." Robert Fields looked at her with a mixture of understanding and professional duty. "I understand, Mrs. Taylor. And between us, this happens all the time. But when there's a formal complaint, we are obligated to investigate. I'm going to need you to come to our office tomorrow at 10 in the morning with all of Leo's documentation. Real address, proofs of residence, school records." He handed her a paper with the address and walked away in the rain. Marianne stood at the door, holding the paper with trembling hands, feeling anger grow inside her like a hot red wave. She went back inside the house with firm steps, went up the main staircase ignoring the unwritten rules that said staff shouldn't use it, and knocked on the door of Edward's study with enough force to make the pictures on the walls tremble. "Come in," his voice came from inside, surprised. Marianne opened the door and entered without permission. Edward was sitting behind his desk, with papers scattered before him and a tired look on his face. She slammed the door behind her. "Your wife just made an anonymous complaint about my son's school enrollment. Tomorrow I have to appear before Child Protective Services, or Leo could be transferred. Or worse." Edward stood up immediately, his expression changing from weariness to anger in a matter of seconds. "She did what?" "Exactly what she threatened to do. I heard you, arguing. I heard her say she was going to make my life difficult, and she delivered. Marianne, I'll fix this. I'll call my lawyers right now. No," she interrupted him, her voice firm. "You're not going to do anything, because anything you do will make it worse. Your wife is doing this to hurt me, but the real target is you, and I won't be used as a pawn in this game of yours." Edward came around the desk and approached her. "Marianne, you don't understand. Helen is capable of much worse things. If I don't intervene now, she'll continue." "Then let her continue." Marianne's voice trembled but remained steady. "I'll go to CPS tomorrow. I'll explain the situation. I'll accept the consequences. And then I'll find another job. Far from here. Far from both of you. You can't do that." "Yes, I can, and I will. Because I made a mistake, Mr. Edward. I let that $100,000 blind me. I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, there was some genuine kindness behind that challenge. But there wasn't. It was just a lonely man trying to fill a void, and my son and I were convenient for that." "That's not true." Edward's voice was low, almost breaking. "That's not true, and you know it." "Then what is true? Tell me. Why did you really make that challenge? Why did you give that money? Was it for the memory of the son you lost? Was it to annoy your wife? Was it out of pity for me?" Edward was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on her, and Marianne saw something break inside him, as if a dam had given way. "Because when I saw Leo there, with that cardboard tube, trying to solve something impossible, I saw everything I could have been and wasn't. I saw innocence, pure intelligence, determination without arrogance. I saw everything that money and power have taken from me over the years. And for a moment, just for a moment, I wanted to be a part of that. I wanted to believe that kindness still exists in the world, that merit still exists, that things can be fair. But they're not, Mr. Edward. Things aren't fair, and you know that better than anyone. I know. That's why I'm trying to change. That's why I'm trying to be different." Marianne felt tears burn, but she refused to let them fall. "Then be different with your wife. Fix your marriage or end it for real. But leave me out of it. Let me take care of my son in peace." And before he could answer, she left the study, went down the stairs, grabbed her bag and left, even though it was only noon. The rain had intensified and Marianne didn't have an umbrella. She walked under the cold water, letting it soak her uniform, her hair, her skin. It was as if the rain could wash away all the confusion, all the suffering, all those wrong choices. When she arrived home soaked, she found Robert sitting in the living room with Leo. Her brother was 26, lean and strong from construction work, with calloused hands and a smile that could always light up any room. But at that moment his face was serious. "Marianne, what happened? Why are you home so early? And you're all wet." Marianne looked at Leo, who had closed his notebook and was watching her with those eyes that were too worried for his age. She sat on the couch, still dripping water, and told them everything. The safe, the money, Helen, the threats, Child Protective Services, everything she had kept inside for the past few weeks finally came out, in a stream of words, punctuated by sobs. When she finished, Robert was red with anger. That rich woman thinks she can do whatever she wants just because she has money. I'm going to go talk to her. I'll show her. No, Marianne interrupted him. You're not going to do anything that could put you at risk. She knows about your situation. She knows you're undocumented. If you get involved, she could have you sent back to Mississippi. And we just let her win? Let her destroy our lives because she has power? Leo, who had been quiet until then, finally spoke. Uncle Rob, Mom's right. If we react with anger, we lose. The only way to win is to be smarter than her. The two adults looked at the boy, surprised by the maturity in his words. And how do we do that, champ? Robert asked, his voice softer. Leo was thoughtful for a moment. Remember when I opened the safe? I didn't use force. I used listening, I used patience, I used intelligence. Maybe we need to do the same thing now. Marianne held her son's hand, feeling a mixture of pride and pain. You're incredible, you know that? But it's not your responsibility to fix this. I know, Mom, but it's not your fault either. You didn't do anything wrong. You just took an opportunity that came along. And if that woman has a problem with it, that's her problem, not ours. That night, Marianne barely slept. She tossed and turned in bed, thinking about what she would say to Child Protective Services, rehearsing explanations, preparing documents. At 3 a.m, she finally gave up trying to sleep and went to the kitchen to make coffee. She found Robert sitting at the table, also awake. He looked at her and smiled tiredly. Can't sleep either. She shook her head and sat down next to him. Robert, if things get bad, if they come after you because of your status, you promise me you'll go back to Mississippi. Promise you won't risk being arrested or deported in a worse way? He held his sister's hand. Marianne, we Taylors have always survived. When Dad left us, we survived. When Mom got sick, we survived. When you got pregnant and everyone judged you, you survived and raised that incredible boy. We always find a way. Always. But I'm tired of just surviving, Robert. I wanted to live. I wanted us to be able to live without fear, without looking over our shoulder all the time. One day we will, sis. One day we will. The next morning, Marianne got ready with care. She chose her best clothes, black dress pants and a white blouse, simple but dignified. She put her hair in a bun, applied light makeup and looked at herself in the mirror. She was a 35-year-old woman who looked 45, with worry lines around her eyes and white strands starting to appear in her dark hair. But there was strength in that face, resilience, and she was going to need all of that strength today. The Child Protective Services office was in an old downtown building with peeling walls and a musty smell that permeated everything. Marianne waited for 40 minutes in a waiting room with uncomfortable chairs and posters about children's rights hanging on the walls. Finally, Robert Fields appeared and called her into a small room with a table and 3 chairs. He sat on one side, she on the other, with a folder full of papers between them. Mrs. Taylor, I'll be direct. The complaint alleges that your son is using a false address to attend a school outside of his residential zone. Is this true? It is. Yes, sir. Marianne kept her voice steady. The school he was at before was very far and didn't have good resources. A friend offered her address so he could have access to a better education. I know it's technically not allowed, but I did it as a mother thinking about my son's future. Robert Fields made some notes. And this friend still lives at the address that was used for enrollment? She does. In fact, I have a statement from her here authorizing the use of the address. Marianne took a paper from her purse that she had prepared the night before, with the notarized signature of Claudia, her best friend. Robert took the paper, read it carefully, and made more notes. Look, Mrs. Taylor, between us, I completely understand your situation. And between what's legal and what's fair, there isn't always much overlap. But my job is to ensure children have access to adequate education. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to close this case, but on one condition. What condition? That by the end of this school year, you regularize Leo's situation. Either you officially move to your friend's address, or you transfer him to the school in the zone where you actually live. I can give you that deadline without any problem, but by January of next year, this situation needs to be resolved. Marianne felt a wave of relief so great she almost collapsed in the chair. "Thank you, Mr. Fields, thank you so much. I'll resolve it, I promise." He smiled, a tired smile of someone who has seen many mothers struggling alone. "I know you will. And just one more thing, Mrs. Taylor." He hesitated. "I shouldn't be saying this, but the person who made the complaint tried to make it sound much worse than it was. They tried to allege neglect, an unsuitable environment, several other things. But when I investigated, I saw it was all lies. Your son is well cared for, has good grades, is polite. So whoever made this complaint wasn't concerned about his well-being. They were trying to harm you." "I know who it was," Marianne said quietly, "and I know why." "Then be careful. People with resources and anger are a dangerous combination." When Marianne left the CPS office, the sun had finally come out after the previous day's rain. She stopped on the sidewalk, closed her eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the warmth on her face. She had won that battle, but she knew the war was far from over. Her cell phone rang. It was an unknown number again. She answered with a racing heart. "Hello? Marianne, this is Beatrice from Human Resources at HG Enterprises, Edward's company." The voice was female, professional. "I'm calling to inform you that your employment was terminated today. Your dismissal was requested by the residence's management." "What? But I didn't resign." "I know, ma'am. But according to the system, there was a request for immediate termination. Your benefits will be paid in full, including vacation and prorated holiday pay. You can come by the office on Friday to sign the papers and receive payment." Marianne hung up the phone with trembling hands. Helen had succeeded. Not directly, but she had found a way. She had used the system, the bureaucratic processes, to remove Marianne from her life without having to get her own hands dirty. And now Marianne was unemployed, with a son to raise, an undocumented brother to protect, and $100,000 that suddenly seemed like much less than it had 3 weeks ago. She sat down on a nearby park bench and let the tears finally fall. Not tears of despair, but of anger. Anger at Helen, at Edward, at a system that allowed people with power to do whatever they wanted without consequences. Anger at herself for believing, even for a moment, that things could be different. But beneath the anger there was something else. Determination. Because Marianne Taylor had survived worse things, and she was not going to let a spoiled, cruel woman destroy everything she had built. She wiped her tears, picked up her phone and made a call. "Claudia, it's me. I need a big favor. Is that cook position at the restaurant where you work still open? Because I'm going to need a new job. And fast." 6 months had passed since Marianne had left the Blackwood mansion. 6 months of rebuilding, of adapting, of learning to breathe again, without feeling the weight of judgmental eyes. The restaurant where Claudia worked, an Italian place in River North called Bella Vita, had been a lifesaver. The owner, an old Neapolitan man named Giuseppe, had given Marianne a chance as a kitchen assistant, and she had quickly proven her worth. Now, half a year later, she was the sous chef, with a better salary than she had at the Blackwood house, and more importantly, with dignity. Leo was adjusting well to his new school, closer to home. His grades remained excellent, and he had made real friends, boys who respected him for his intelligence without envying him for it. Robert had obtained his papers with the help of a lawyer Giuseppe recommended, and now he worked legally at a construction company with a contract and full benefits. Life wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and that made all the difference. On a cold Tuesday in November, Marianne was preparing the carbonara sauce that had become her specialty when Giuseppe entered the kitchen with a strange expression on his face. "Marianne, there's a man out front asking to speak with you. He said it's urgent." She wiped her hands on her apron, intrigued. She left the kitchen and found Edward Blackwood sitting at a table near the window, wearing a dark grey suit and a tired expression. He had lost weight since she last saw him, and there were more grey strands in his hair. When he saw her, he stood up but didn't try to approach. "Marianne, thank you for agreeing to speak with me." She crossed her arms, keeping her distance. "What do you want?" He looked around, noticing that other customers were watching. "Can we talk in private, just 5 minutes?" Marianne hesitated, but Giuseppe gestured that it was okay. She led Edward to a small office in the back of the restaurant. They remained standing, not sitting, the tension filling the space between them. "I came to apologize," he began, "for everything, for putting you in that situation, for not protecting you from Helen, for being a coward. Your apology is 6 months late, Mr. Blackwood. I know, and I have no excuse for that either. He hesitated, searching for the words. "I was busy destroying my own life. Helen and I are divorced. It was finalized last week." Marianne felt a pang of something that wasn't quite pity, but it was close. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It was the best decision I've made in years. I should have done it a long time ago." He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture Marianne had never seen from him before. "But I didn't come here just to apologize. I came to tell you something you need to know." "What?" "After you left, I started looking into some things. How Helen knew about your brother's situation, about Leo's school enrollment. And I discovered she had hired a private investigator, spent over $20,000 looking for anything she could use against you." Marianne felt the anger boil up again. That woman was obsessed. She was, but not anymore. Edward took a leather folder from the briefcase he was carrying. "During the divorce, my lawyers gained access to her bank records, and they found some interesting things. Transfers to offshore accounts, money embezzled from charity projects she managed, various irregularities." "And what did you do with that?" "I gave her a choice. Either she accepted the divorce without causing trouble, without asking for absurd alimony, without trying to take half the company, or I would take all of it to the authorities. She chose the peaceful divorce. She's living in Palm Beach now with her mother." Marianne didn't know how to feel. Part of her was satisfied to know that Helen had faced consequences. Another part just wanted to forget the whole thing. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know that it wasn't just you against a powerful woman. You were against a corrupt and cruel woman. And she didn't win, Marianne. You won. You got out of there, rebuilt your life, and remained who you've always been." She had to flee the country to escape her own choices. Edward extended the folder to Marianne. "Inside here is a copy of all the documents about her investigations against you. I thought you might want to have it, in case you ever needed it." Marianne took the folder but didn't open it. "And now, why are you really here, Mr. Blackwood? Because I don't believe you came just to give me documents and apologize." He smiled, and for the first time, Marianne saw something genuine in that smile. "You were always smarter than me. The truth is, I'm trying to change. For real. This time. I've closed several questionable deals. I've donated to reputable charities. I'm trying to be the kind of man my son could respect if he knew me." "That's good. I hope you succeed." "And there's something else." He hesitated. "I would like to create an educational fund for Leo, something that would guarantee his education through university, as a way to compensate for all the suffering I caused." Marianne felt her heart speed up. "No. Thank you. But no." "Why?" "It's not charity, Marianne. It's responsibility. I put you both in an impossible situation. Let me do this. Because if I accept, I'll be accepting that we need you to have a future, and we don't." Her voice came out firm. "I'm working. Robert is working. We saved the money you gave us, and we're using it wisely. Leo will have a good education because we will work for it, not because a rich man decided to feel better about himself by helping us." Edward was silent for a long moment, and then he nodded. "You're right. I'm sorry. I'm still learning not to use money as a solution for everything. I'm glad you're learning, truly, but we can't. But we be your redemption project, Mr. Blackwood. We have to be our own story." He extended his hand. "Then just let me say one last thing. Your son is exceptional, and you are the reason for it. You raised an incredible human being with minimal resources and infinite love. And if one day he becomes someone important, someone who changes the world, it will be because of you. Not because of me, not because of $100,000, but because of everything you taught him about character, about resilience, about kindness." Marianne shook his hand, feeling tears burn. "Thank you for everything, even the bad parts, because they taught us that we're stronger than we imagined." Edward turned to leave, but stopped at the door. Oh, and Marianne, that day with the safe. Those were the most impressive 60 seconds I have ever witnessed in my entire life, and not because the safe was opened, but because I saw a child face the impossible with courage, intelligence, and humility. That's worth more than all the money I have. And then he left, leaving Marianne alone in the small office with the folder in her hand and tears streaming down her face. She stood there for a few minutes, processing everything that had happened. Then she opened the folder and quickly leafed through the documents. There were dozens of pages detailing Helen's investigations, the private detectives' reports, the suspicious bank accounts. It was proof of everything Edward had said. But Marianne didn't need it. She closed the folder and put it in a desk drawer. Maybe one day she would, or maybe not. Either way, that was the past. And she was more interested in the future. When she returned to the kitchen, Giuseppe was waiting with a worried expression. Is everything okay, Marianne? It is, Giuseppe. Everything is fine. That man, who was he? Someone from my past, but he's not part of my present. The old Neapolitan smiled and placed a hand on her shoulder. Bene, the past is for learning, not for living. Now get back to your sauce before it burns. That night, when Marianne got home, she found Leo and Robert playing cards at the kitchen table. The scene was so normal, so common, so perfectly imperfect, that she felt her heart ache with gratitude. "Mom, are you okay?" Leo looked at her with those eyes that saw everything. "You look like you've been crying." She sat at the table with them and told them about Edward's visit, about the divorce, about everything. When she finished, Leo was thoughtful for a moment. "Do you think he's really changed, Mom?" Marianne considered the question carefully. "I think he's trying. But real change takes time. It takes more than 6 months. It takes a lifetime of right choices, day after day." "Did you change after everything that happened?" Marianne looked around the small kitchen, at her brother beside her, at her son in front of her, at the simple but honest life they had built. "I don't think I changed. I think I just became more myself, more aware of what matters, stronger in the ways I always was." "And the money?" Robert asked. "We still have most of it saved. What are we going to do?" Marianne had thought about this many times in recent months. "I want to use part of it to pay for a good college for Leo when the time comes, another part to invest in a small business, maybe our own restaurant one day, and the rest for emergencies, but slowly, with a plan, no rush." "What about a house?" Leo asked. "You always talked about buying a house." "We will, but not now. When the time is right. When we're sure it's what we want. Because a house isn't just a place, honey. It's a feeling. And I already feel at home here with you two. The rest is just walls." Leo smiled, that shy smile that lit up the whole kitchen. "I feel at home too, Mum." They continued playing cards late into the night, laughing at silly jokes, making plans for the future, simply existing together without the weight of impossible expectations or judgmental eyes. 2 weeks later, it was Christmas Eve. The restaurant was packed, and Marianne worked until almost midnight, preparing special holiday dishes. When she finally finished, Giuseppe called all the employees for a toast. "This year was hard for all of us," he said, with his thick Italian accent, "but we overcame, we grew, and we have much to be thankful for, especially for Marianne, who came here 6 months ago as an assistant and is now one of the best cooks I've ever had. Salute!" Everyone toasted, and Marianne felt her face flush with pride and emotion. As she was packing her things to leave, her cell phone rang, an unknown number again. She almost didn't answer, but something made her accept the call. "Hello? Marianne?" A young, hesitant female voice. "My name is Isabella. I was Helen Blackwood's personal assistant." Marianne's heart sped up. "What do you want?" "I just wanted to call you to say I'm sorry. For everything. I knew what she was doing to you. I saw the calls to the detective, the emails to Child Protective Services, and I did nothing to stop it. I was afraid of losing my job. But that doesn't justify it, so I wanted to apologize." Marianne was silent for a moment, processing those words. "Why are you calling me now?" After all this time? Because Helen is gone. Because I don't work for her anymore. And because, Isabella hesitated, because I have a 10-year-old daughter, and when I think of someone doing to her what Helen did to your son, it makes me sick. You didn't deserve that. Leo didn't deserve that. Thank you for calling, Isabella, really, but you don't need to carry that guilt. Everyone is responsible for their own choices. Helen made hers, you made yours, and I made mine. The important thing is that we all learn from them. You're much more generous than I would be in your place. Marianne smiled, even though she knew Isabella couldn't see it. It's not generosity. It's just exhaustion from carrying anger. Life is too short for that. When she hung up, Marianne stood on the street, looking at the Christmas lights decorating the surrounding shops. Chicago was beautiful that night, alive and bright, and she was a part of it all. Not as a victim, not as an invisible maid, but as a strong woman who had faced storms and come out the other side still standing. She took the subway home, and during the ride, she thought about everything that had happened in the last year. The safe challenge seemed like it had happened in a different lifetime, to different people. But it hadn't. It had happened to her and Leo, and they had survived. More than that, they had thrived. When she got home, she found the small Christmas tree Robert had set up in the living room, decorated with simple but loving ornaments. Leo was asleep, on the couch, a book still open on his lap. She covered him with a blanket and kissed his forehead, whispering, "Merry Christmas, my love. You're the best gift I could have ever asked for." On Christmas Day, they had a simple dinner at Claudia's house, who had practically become family. There was laughter, homemade food, music, and that sense of belonging that no amount of money can buy. In the middle of dinner, Leo asked for everyone's attention. "I'd like to make a toast," he raised his glass of juice, "to this crazy year, to the things we learned, to the people we lost and the ones we gained, and most of all to realizing that family isn't about last names or big houses. It's about who's by your side when everything falls apart. It's about who helps you rebuild. So I toast to you, my real family." Everyone toasted with tears in their eyes, and Marianne looked at her son with a pride so immense it felt like it couldn't fit inside her chest. 3 months later, in March of the following year, Marianne was at work when Giuseppe called her into his office. She entered nervously, imagining she might have done something wrong. "Sit, Marianne, I have a proposal for you." She sat down, her hands sweating. "Yes, sir? I'm getting old. My daughter lives in Italy and doesn't want to come back to the US. I have no one to leave this restaurant to when I retire. And it's been a dream of mine to see this place live on after I'm gone." "Giuseppe, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to offer you a partnership. 20% of the restaurant now, with an option to buy another 30% over the next 5 years. You have talent, you have work ethic, you have the right heart. This place could be yours if you want it." Marianne was speechless. It was more than she had ever dared to dream. "Giuseppe, I don't know what to say. I don't have enough money to—" "I'm not asking for money now, I'm investing in you. The money comes later when the business grows. What matters is that you accept the responsibility." She felt tears stream down her face. "I accept. Of course, I accept." "Excellent. Then we'll sign the papers next week. And Marianne, welcome to the Bella Vita family." When Marianne left the office, she had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. It was too much. It was everything she had worked for, everything she had dreamed of, happening all at once. She took out her phone and called Leo, who was at school. "Honey, when you get home today, we need to celebrate. Something incredible happened." "What, Mum?" "I'll tell you in person, but just know that everything we went through, all the hardships, all the bad moments, they were worth it. We made it to the other side, Leo, we did it." That night they celebrated with a special dinner that Marianne prepared, using recipes she had learned at the restaurant. Robert brought soda and ice cream. Claudia showed up with flowers, and together, that improvised but true family celebrated a victory that had been won with blood, sweat and tears. 6 months after that, on a September morning, Marianne was opening the restaurant when she saw a familiar figure across the street, Edward Blackwood, standing next to a car, watching. But this time he didn't cross the street, he just waved, a small, respectful gesture. And then He got in the car and drove away. Marianne waved back, and in that gesture there was forgiveness, closure, gratitude for the lessons learned. Because Edward had been a part of her story, but he wasn't anymore. Now she was the author of her own narrative. She entered the restaurant, turned on the lights, and began to prepare for another day of work. Work that now meant something different. It was no longer about survival. It was about building, about a legacy, about showing her son that dreams aren't given, they're earned. And as she chopped vegetables and prepared sauces, Marianne thought about that day with the safe, almost 2 years ago. She thought of the boy with the cardboard tube facing the impossible, and she realized that she had been that safe, locked, closed, seemingly impenetrable. But Leo, with his innocence and determination, had found the right combination. He had opened not just the metal safe, but her heart to new possibilities. Life had tested them both in ways she never imagined. It had placed obstacles, traps, cruel people in their path, but they had gotten through it all together, and now they were stronger than ever. Leo entered the restaurant after school, as he did every afternoon. Now 14, he was taller. His voice was changing, but his eyes were still the same. Curious, intelligent, kind. "Mom, I brought my report card. Want to see?" She wiped her hands and took the paper. Excellent grades, as always, but what caught her attention was a comment from his physics teacher. "Leo demonstrates exceptional skills in acoustics and mechanics. I strongly recommend enrolling him in science outreach programs." Marianne looked at her son with pride. "Did you see this? This is amazing, my love. It's because of you, Mom. Everything I can do is because you showed me how to be strong, how not to give up, how to face the impossible. No, honey, you did this on your own. I just gave you love. The rest was all you. But I still use that cardboard tube sometimes, you know." He smiled. "When I need to remember that even the simplest tools can do extraordinary things." Marianne hugged her son, her heart overflowing. And as she held him, she knew with absolute certainty that she had won. Not because she had money in the bank or a partnership in a restaurant, but because she had raised an exceptional human being who understood that strength is not about power but about character, that intelligence is not about knowing everything but about knowing how to listen, that success is not about how much you have, but about who you are. And in that hug, in that restaurant kitchen that was now partly hers, Marianne Taylor finally understood what Edward had tried to say almost 2 years ago. The true value of a safe isn't in keeping secrets, it's in revealing who has the capacity to understand them. And she and Leo had not just understood, they had transcended. Life had placed an impossible safe in their path, and they, with love, intelligence, and determination, had not only opened that safe, but had built an entire future on the other side of it. And if anyone were to ask Marianne if she would do it all over again, she would answer without hesitation, yes. Because every hardship had been a lesson, every tear had watered the garden of tomorrow. Every challenge had forged the strength they now carried. The safe had opened 2 years ago, but the real door, the door to a life of dignity, purpose and unconditional love, was just beginning to open. And on the other side, a bright future was waiting for them. A future they had built themselves, click by click, choice by choice, hug by hug. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Marianne and Leo has touched your heart. If you were moved by the journey of this warrior mother and her extraordinary son, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most. Was it when Leo opened the safe with intelligence and courage? Was it when Marianne confronted Helen and refused to be diminished? Or was it when she finally achieved the recognition she always deserved? Every day we bring intense stories like this, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, which show that true strength comes not from money or power, but from love, resilience, and dignity. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions and make you reflect on what truly matters in life.